Good day, everyone. My name is Michael Tieland, and today I would like to present to you dietary strategies to augment muscle mass in the elderly. Normally, I would present this at the ASPEN conference in Florida, but due to the corona crisis, I was not able to do that. Luckily, the ASPEN committee and our sponsor, Fonterra, allowed me to present this online. So to start off with the take-home message, here we see a slide of Jack LaLanne saying almost 30 years ago that exercise is king, nutrition is queen, and if you put them together, you get a kingdom. And after 30 years of science, he is absolutely right. We now see that exercise is very potent to stimulate muscle mass, but we really need nutrition along with exercise to get that kingdom or to increase your muscle mass. If we look at the aging population, we all know that it is rising. And with that comes an increase in people with frail characteristics, such as low walking speed, or they are unable to get up from a chair, or they are dependent on care, that sort of thing. Well, if you look at the underpinning mechanism or underpinning factor that causes frailty, one of the most important factors is sarcopenia. And here you see a slide showing that when you are born, you start off with an X amount of muscle mass and strength. But after the age of, let's say, 30 or 40, you slowly starts to decline that muscle mass. And then it's very important to look at how that declines. Is that declining according to the upper line, where you are aging very successfully, losing not so much muscle mass or strength, and having a happy elderly life? Or are you losing your muscle mass very rapidly, which causes a low physical performance and even disability at later life? The difference between those lines are super interesting and is also multifactorial. Nutrition and exercise play a huge role in this factor. If you look at a sarcopenia a little bit more closely, it's not like a very nicely curved line downwards. It's more associated with certain events, a certain crisis, you can say, such as a hospital admission or a week of the flu or even a virus. What happens then is that during that period of hospitalization, for instance, you will lose your muscle mass very rapidly, uh, up to 1 kilogram of muscle mass during a week. Here we have some real data showing that sarcopenia, on average, you will lose about 0.2 kilograms per year. That's on average. But if you compare it to a crisis situation, such as hospitalization, you may lose up the same amount, not per year, but per day. So if you take this 0.2 kilogram per day situation during hospitalization, and you will lay in hospital for, let's say, a week, you will lose more than 1 kilogram of muscle mass. So what do you need to do to regain that muscle mass? Well, studies of mine and others show that you really need to do heavy resistance exercise for at least 3 or even 6 months, along with dietary protein, to regain that lost muscle mass during hospitalization. So if you want to come back to the dashed line up here, we really need to focus on an optimal recovery with exercise and with nutrition or dietary protein. If we look at the causes of sarcopenia, it is multifactorial. Here we see multiple factors such as nutritional status, hormonal levels, genetics, innovation, oxidative stress, inflammation, exercise, and disease. They're all related to sarcopenia. But if we look at the absolute basis of the loss of muscle mass, I think you should look at the balance between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein degradation or muscle protein breakdown. If the muscle protein synthesis is higher than the breakdown, the net balance is positive, and you will gain muscle mass. If the balance is negative, that means that there's a lower muscle protein synthesis rate and a higher muscle protein degradation. In that situation, the net balance is negative and you will lose muscle mass. If you look at sarcopenia, which is a process over decades, you can say that during that period, the net balance was negative because you lost muscle mass. One of the most important parts of this negative balance is a decline in muscle protein synthesis. This is called anabolic resistance. Here you see a very interesting slide, in my opinion, showing how anabolic resistance works. Here we have an anabolic stimuli, such as dietary protein. If you ingest dietary protein, your MPS, muscle protein synthesis, goes up. At the same time, your muscle breakdown rates go down. In this situation, the net balance is positive and you will gain muscle mass. If you then look at the same anabolic stimuli, but then look at it in the elderly, muscle protein synthesis will go up, muscle protein breakdown rate will go down, but the net balance is less positive. And this is due to the limited response or diminished response of muscle protein synthesis rates after this anabolic stimuli, after the same anabolic stimuli. So in conclusion, muscle protein synthesis rate in the elderly are lower as compared to the younger ones, resulting in a net less positive balance. And if this happens over the course of one day, it might be not a problem, but it happens over the course of days and weeks and months and even years. And then all these tiny little difference adds up, becomes a huge difference and a huge factor for sarcopenia. Luckily, we have dietary interventions to counteract sarcopenia. Dietary interventions of dietary protein, or vitamin D, a vitamin, or minerals such as magnesium, or omega-3 fatty acids have been shown to increase muscle protein synthesis and increase muscle mass. But by far, the best and most evidence we have is about dietary protein. Therefore, I would like to show you some slides on this. Here we see the dietary protein intake in community dwelling, frail, and institutionalized elderly. The red line is the recommended daily allowance of 0.8. What you see up here is that the majority of community dwelling elderly and frail elderly are well above this 0.8 level. The institutionalized elderly have a dietary protein intake of 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight per day. And if you look at the hospital setting, it is even less. Then there are some nutritional researchers that say that the intake of dietary protein should be higher than the 0.8 to maintain muscle health or improve muscle health. Some suggestions, for instance, by ASPEN in Europe, suggest that it should be 1.2 grams. This is this bar. If we then look at the dietary protein intake of the elderly, whether they are frail, community dwelling, or institutionalized, they all have an inadequate dietary protein intake. If we look at the protein distribution, it looks like this. Many researchers suggest that the dietary protein intake per main meal should be at least 25 grams or even higher to optimize the muscle protein synthetic response. If that is true, then the intake at breakfast, at lunch, or even prior to sleep is very low. Only during the dinner or after dinner, the muscle protein synthetic response is, let's say, maximal. But there's a huge amount of time that people do not ingest a sufficient amount of protein to optimize their muscle protein synthetic response. Therefore, I believe there's a lot of scope for improvement. So, how can we improve the muscle protein synthetic response in the elderly? Well, there are a couple of strategies. One is to increase the dose of dietary protein intake, simply adding more protein intake to the meals. Another strategy is to look at the type of protein, or the source, or the timing or distribution of the protein. Here we see a dose response study showing the dose of dietary protein, 10 grams, 20, 30, and 40 grams, and the fractional synthetic rate, muscle protein synthesis rate, in both the young and the elderly. The upper line is the young, and the lower line is the elderly, showing that elderly can have a lower muscle protein synthetic response after especially low protein intakes. Some studies show that you need to have at least 35 grams or even 40 grams of protein to have a similar muscle protein synthetic response as the young. Well, then a lot of dietitians would say to me, well, Mike, how is this possible? How can I increase the protein intake up to 40 grams of protein per main meal? That is not possible due to the lack of appetite of elderly. Then my advice would be try to increase the protein intake as high as you can with especially liquid type of products, because those products have a lower satiety rate. Here we have an animal type of study looking at different sources of protein and comparing that on muscle protein synthesis rate. And what we generally see is that the animal-based protein sources, such as milk protein, this is a whey protein source which comes from milk, or eggs, or beef, or fish, are in general have a higher muscle protein synthesis rates as compared to the plant-based proteins, such as soy protein or wheat protein. This is an animal study. What about human intervention trials? Well, here we see a human intervention study comparing whey protein, casein protein, and wheat protein. So the whey and the casein protein, those are milk proteins. The animal type of proteins, and the wheat protein is a plant-based protein. And if you compare 35 grams of those proteins on muscle protein synthesis, you'll see that the whey and the casein protein have a higher muscle protein synthetic response as compared to the wheat protein. Similar amount, 35 grams. This does not mean that you can't increase your muscle protein synthetic response with plant-based protein. You can, but you only need more protein of it. And that is what we see within this bar of 60 grams of wheat protein. If you consume 60 grams of wheat protein, you have a similar response as a whey protein. So you can do this. But for an elderly population, it is less practical and I think not suitable. 60 grams of protein is a lot of protein. And I believe that if you want, from a health perspective that is, if you want to increase your muscle protein synthetic response, I think the animal type of proteins are much more suitable for the older population. If you are vegan and you really want to increase your muscle protein synthetic response with plant-based proteins, I would like to advise you to either combine ideal plant-based proteins together to have an optimal amino acid profile and therefore increase your muscle protein synthetic response, or eat more of it. Or combine it with exercise to make your muscles more sensitive to the protein. But these are all strategies that are more poorly understood and less studied. So far, the data suggests that the animal type of proteins are superior as compared to the plant-based proteins. Another important strategy is to look at the distribution of protein. Here we see a study done in younger people, not in older people, but in younger people, comparing the same amount of protein, namely 80 grams of protein, the same source of protein, but distributed differently over the day. And what we see here is that 40 times 20 grams of protein have a higher muscle protein synthetic response as compared to 2 times 40 or 8 times 10 grams of protein. So simply distributing the protein differently over the day have an impact on muscle protein synthesis. In the young at least. We don't have any data on elderly people yet. Another important strategy is to look at the impact of dietary protein intake prior to sleep on muscle protein synthesis. And this is done by Imre Gal, for example. She did a very elegant and amazing study. I got huge respect for her pulling this off, collecting blood samples during the night and taking muscle biopsies and so forth. It's an amazing study with very nice data as well, because he showed that ingesting protein intake prior to sleep of 20 grams of protein or 40 grams of protein will stimulate your muscle protein synthetic response during the night. This is a very practical and suitable strategy to further improve the net balance of your protein turnover. And this may help to improve your muscle mass or even maintain your muscle mass as you go older. Well, I just showed you some short-term effects of dietary protein on muscle protein synthesis. These are lab-based, well-controlled interventions, and I believe we should also look at the longer-term benefits of dietary protein as well as exercise on muscle mass. And a few years ago, I performed a dietary protein intervention on very frail elderly people, randomizing very frail elderly people into two groups. One group received 2 times 15 grams of protein per day, supplied at breakfast and at lunch, and we compared that with a placebo supplement. And after 6 months, we assessed muscle mass. And here we see the results. After 6 months of intervention, we did not see any benefits of increasing dietary protein intake as compared to the placebo group. So simply increasing dietary protein will not increase your total lean mass or muscle mass. Perhaps if I did this for, let's say, 2 or 5 years, then we might see a difference, because then the placebo group may have declined their muscle mass and protein may preserve this decline. But we don't know. I believe we should add exercise into the mix. And here we see a study done by me a couple of years ago, where I randomized very frail older adults into the two groups. One received 2 times 50 grams of protein, and the other received a placebo drink. And both groups had 2 times per week a resistance exercise training. Both groups. And we measured muscle mass after 6 months. And these were the results. So after 6 months of intervention, we saw that in the protein group, there was a huge increase in muscle mass, up to 1.4 kilograms of muscle mass gain after 24 weeks of intervention. Whereas the placebo group, who did not receive any extra protein, but did 2 times a week of exercise, did not increase their muscle mass. So in frail older adults, dietary protein intake is required to gain muscle mass during a resistance exercise protocol. Well, lately we've performed a more practical type of study where we assess the impact of a home-based exercise in community-dwelling older adults. We got 3 groups. One group was the control group, the other group was a home-based exercise group, and the third group was a group that did home-based exercise and also received some dietary protein counseling or coaching. And here we see the results. They are very preliminary and still in preparation, but I could not resist to present it to you here. Here we see that, again, that dietary protein and exercise goes very well together to improve, in this circumstance, the appendicular lean mass. So dietary protein along with home-based exercise maintained the muscle mass, whereas the control group and simply the home-based exercise group did not maintain their muscle mass. So to conclude, I believe that dietary protein intake in the elderly is inadequate. And this intake can be optimized by improving the dose, the source, or distribution of dietary protein intake. Improving dietary protein intake does stimulate muscle protein synthesis rate, but simply increasing the intake does not augment muscle mass. To increase muscle mass, dietary protein intake is required during an exercise protocol in an older population. So, hopefully I convince you that exercise and dietary protein goes very well together. And please remember this quote of him from Jack LaLanne, that exercise is king, nutrition is queen, and if you put them together, you get a kingdom. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I hope you liked it and you've learned something. If you have any questions, please send me an email or through our group. I would like to acknowledge our research group. It's a large group who is focusing on applied nutritional and exercise interventions. So if you have any questions, please send me out an email and I'll contact you. Have a good day.